All right, I think we're recording. All right, well, I'm here with Erik Mekelberg, who's the Chief Revenue Office of, do you say it, Cibros?
The bros, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, wonderful. And, obviously did a PhD at Denver. It was one of my classmates. And so tell me, why did you embark upon the PhD journey to begin with?
That's a good question, Kelly. Multiple reasons, really. It's always been a dream of mine to get a PhD, and I felt like I got my undergrad and then I got a master's in business, and I felt like there was still some more to be gained from spending more time with academia. I've been working, through all my degrees. My undergrad, my graduate degree, I was working full time while I was getting those. It was nights and weekends. And I figured, no issue doing another nights and weekends degree. And this PhD was interesting because the unique thing about a business PhD is that you look at so many different areas. You get exposure to all these different nuances, from finance to, leadership to management to ethics, all kinds of different areas. And so that really intrigued me. I always love learning more, and the whole idea of learning more academically, right? What does it mean to read a study? I found it really difficult before I got the PhD to read any study. There's so much statistics in there, strange language. It's a whole new language, really. And I was always excited to learn to speak that language and read that language and consume it. And that was one of the things that really drove me towards, hey, let's just do it. And then really, COVID had started. I was sitting at home. Um, I don't drink, so there wasn't much to do. I figured, okay, might as well spend the
You could
time on
drink
the
or
PhD.
do a PhD. I don't think I've heard that one before. Yeah, good. And then what did you hope you would do with it? What did you think, sort of what would be the outcome?
I think there wasn't really a linear kind of input to outcome relationship that I had in mind. It was kind of similar when I got my MBA previously, where I didn't really need it or use it specifically, but it had all these externalities. And the same with the PhD. I got to know Kelly, for example, right? That was exciting, as well as many other really, really awesome people. I learned so much about areas I had no idea of. And ultimately, I feel like it really helps me understand the world better. And that was also what I was expecting. I never wanted to go into teaching, but now I'm a teacher at a university, right? So it's those things type of kind of happen. And I'd say that the outcome, although non-linear, was way more than I would have ever expected. Yeah.
Well, that's great.
How
Now, tell
how
us
about
about
you?
your dissertation and what you studied.
Yeah, dissertation. So when I started my PhD, I was gung ho on doing marketing research. I was in sales at the time, had worked in sales for a long time for a tech company, and I thought, hey, this is great. I can really research how to optimize sales and how to do it better, understand the academic background. And then through the PhD program, through the first couple of years, I discovered that I had a really keen interest in statistics and in creating models and in doing statistical analysis. And I also really found out that I love finance and data. And ultimately, what ended up happening is I found a really great professor, Jack Strauss, who ended up being my advisor. And he really guided me into an area of forecasting, returns forecasting, asset returns forecasting. And it's a fascinating area. I still do research there now, even after getting the PhD done. And I've now 3 papers published in this domain as well, which is awesome. It's fun. And so again, it wasn't really linear for me, right? I didn't stick with the subject that I thought I was going to research. I found a completely new subject that has nothing to do with my day job or my other interest pre-PhD. And so it opened this whole new world for me. And that's been really exciting. So the dissertation, to answer your question, was around finding out what the nuances of applying machine learning to asset return forecasting are, and how those nuances can be managed to improve forecasts.
And now, not only having a couple of papers on the topic, you're
Yeah.
a gazillionaire because you figured out how markets work and when they break. And
I'm still working on it. Well, here's the thing. When you do research on asset returns, you find out everything that doesn't work, but they don't tell you what works.
That's right. You're disproving the null
That's exactly
hypothesis.
right. Full
So
full
it's not
academic
this, it's not
fashion.
this. Oh, that's
Academia works by
great.
rejection, not by confirmation, right? That's exactly what happens.
And then, of course, in the process, you taught all of us statistics because we understood you better than our actual professors. So now you're teaching some statistical courses.
Exactly right. Yeah, and I even have the pleasure of teaching PhD courses in statistics and finance now, which has been super fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And you are an excellent teacher, so that's really great that you also found that niche.
Mhm.
So do you think on that, do you think skills you learned in the PhD actually helped you in your career?
Oh, definitely. Yes. I'd say the key skill that I learned to handle the PhD load in addition to a full-time job, and I know you could relate to this, I had to completely change my schedule, right? And I changed it so that I was getting up earlier in the morning and I was having focus time in the morning. And then at night, I was also kind of putting focus time in on the weekends. And I didn't stop that. So I kept the same routine and schedule even after the PhD, which helps me just be so much more effective now with what I do. Now I run sales. I used to run sales for another company for North America. Now I run global sales, right? My India team works from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. my time. And having this kind of rigorous schedule of being awake early and be really kind of structuring the day appropriately helps me to tackle that and cope with it. And the other thing is taking an academic approach to things. When sometimes, you have this situation where you need to hold a presentation on a subject you know nothing about or very little about, or maybe you want to find out something about a new area. The company I work for, we do IoT, Internet of Things type software, and there's a lot moving in this area. What is AI's perspective on this? How can AI help us do our business and create our products and make our customers successful? And in my approach to this is now, if I want to find out more, first thing I go is to the e-library, find out what were the recent academic articles that were written on this topic, and read the ones with the most citations. And then, that because I learned that it gives me a great overview to read the lit review sections of those articles. And then okay, kind of who's who, and then you can search more targeted, okay, who has written a recent good book about this that's has some academic background, or what are the right methods that people used, right? You can kind of assess and get insights, very deep insights into a new subject very, very quickly, taking this academic approach. And I think having training and, I think through the PhD program, we might have read 700 articles, right? All of us when we were going through it. And that
Mhm.
muscle memory of consuming dense content very quickly is just worth gold, right? Because now anything else is less dense. Any email, any newspaper article you would read, any book you would read, you're just going to breeze through because the content density is so much lower than academic articles. And I think that those are all, again, externalities that are really helpful and that help with anything in the daily job, at home, right? With any personal projects that one might have. It's extremely valuable.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting when you were talking about the blocking of time and really it's the focus time, right? It's
I,
being able to train yourself to and setting aside the structure so that you can go deep on things because
that's right.
you now have to at some point you have to sleep and I know you hardly sleep, but being able to get this time to get deep in topics and being able to siphon out the rest of the world from that space is really, really key. That's the only way I'm sure that you got 3 more articles done.
Exactly. One,
Yeah.
I'll give you another interesting example. A few weeks ago, a customer reached out to us and wanted us to help them with a data science project. So, and this is a scenario where this is a company that makes trucks. They produce trucks over in Europe. And they said, can you help us figure out, they had specific problems with their battery system. And they said, you guys are tracking all this data for us. Can you help us figure out how we make this battery system more robust based on the data that you have in those buses? We said, yeah, no problem. We'll put some people on it. So we put one of our data gurus on the project, and he was working on it for a few days and was making some progress. And then I asked him, "Hey, can you present?" His name is Lokesh. Can you present this to me? Or can you present me your findings and how you got to them? And I looked at the findings, and it's I was cringing because the way he was going at it was completely non-academic. And he was doing regressions, and he wasn't even looking at the fit metrics, right? And so he just looked at the R square. How well does my data explain the output? But he didn't know that his residuals weren't distributed right? And that his Jog-Bara test was significant, meaning that that is not a necessarily a valid result. And so those are the things that I feel like you know, having a quick glance at somebody's statistical analysis and being able to understand, is it valid? Is it not valid? Can you trust the data? That's really valuable. And that again, it's come back to the muscle memory, right? If you know what to look at, you know how to interpret data, that's immensely helpful in all parts of life.
Yeah, great. That's really great because, data is the new currency, right? In the workplace. And there's a lot of people saying stuff, and making decisions with data that you're right. If you can't test it or challenge it, then how
Yeah.
can you lead them?
Right. And you see the newspaper article that says, I don't know, right? This new medication makes it 10% less likely for you to get a certain disease. And you ask, okay, well, what's the standard deviation around this, right? Really? 10%? 10% of what, really?
Right,
Sample
exactly. And how is the study formed and
size.
who did they even study,
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
For sure. So what would your advice be for doctoral students, and not only for the program, but for their career at this point?
I think some people start this DBA program or PhD programs just to have the degree, just to be a doctor. And I think to me, that's not the right approach. I think the right approach is you should do it because you want to learn something. And also you should do it because you're going to find out something, right? You're going to go through a dissertation, invest an incredible amount of time in researching a topic and become a world expert in the topic. And you should publish it. You should have that ambition to go ahead and publish the research. That's the only way anyone else is ever going to consume all this work that you put in and the output of that. And I think that if I was giving myself some guidance before I did this program, this PhD program is, be open-minded, be open-minded in looking at all the areas that you study as potential research areas that are super interesting, and just hone whatever you're good at, and then try to publish as much as possible, because that also has some other nice effects, right? Now that I've published papers, I'm asked to review other people's papers regularly, and you kind of stay in touch with your area because you're such an expert now, and other people want your opinion. So now you read and give your opinion, and then you have another research idea coming out of that. So that's been really cool.
Yeah, you're making a really great point. You do put all this effort in. Why
Mhm.
not go ahead and try to get it published? And also, I think there's this gift that DBA and executive PhD students have, which is the topics. They have access to data and they have access to really interesting topics that, maybe
Right.
someone who hasn't been in the workplace doesn't really see.
Very true. Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Mekelberg, for this wonderful information. I really appreciate you giving us all the time to share your experience.
You're most welcome, Kelly. Thank you.